Hi there, Steve Kaufman. I hope you're enjoying your holidays. I was asked by one of my viewers if my approach to language learning or my method of language learning has changed over the years. So I thought I would try to answer that question today. By the way, if some of you would like to hear me speak in other languages, let me know and tell me which language. I don't do this so much to demonstrate, because I'm going to be pretty rusty in some of them, but if some of you have trouble understanding me in English, I am quite happy to attempt to explain things in other languages. Let me know. However, the question is, has my method or my approach to language learning changed? And the answer is no. So if we look first of all at French, which I had going through elementary school, high school, not interested. Potentially I could have been immersed in French living in Montreal, but I wasn't interested. When I went to university, I had a professor who made it interesting. I don't have copies of those books that we used, but they were very good. They just turned me on to French culture, and then I went at it. I looked for things that interested me, and I did a lot of listening and reading. And of course, then I went off to France, and I studied there, and I, of course, used the language every day. Chinese, I was, as some of you may know, I was sent to Hong Kong by the Canadian government to learn Chinese. Again, the whole emphasis was on listening and reading and doing things that were meaningful to me. And so in addition to our course content, I sought out all kinds of readers. I have a vast library, bookshelf of Chinese books with vocabulary notes per chapter, literature, history, you name it. And I don't think any of the other students did that. And whenever I could get a hold of any audio material, including xiangsheng material like comic dialogues, I would listen to that. So that has always been my approach. When I moved to Japan, even though I was potentially immersed in the language, I spent an awful lot of time listening and reading. Lots of other people who lived in Japan didn't take advantage. In order for me to be able to take advantage of that environment that surrounded me, I had to bring my level up, and that I did through listening and reading. Of course, I would interact with people at an earlier stage because I was right there. So in a store or wherever, I had to try to use whatever I had, but those were meaningful exchanges in the language. I am not that fond of having an artificial exchange for the sake of having an exchange. If I'm where the language is spoken, that's a meaningful exchange, then I get into it, and that becomes meaningful content. So none of that has changed. What has changed dramatically is the kind of tools that are available. So when I was doing Chinese, I had books. I don't know if it's worth showing. I've shown them before. Yeah, here, I still have it. Chinese lectures, at least 20 lectures in Chinese culture. 中国文化20讲. Great, simplified to some extent. I mean, we had traditional characters. You probably can't see that. But there were, first of all, we had the text in pinyin. We had audio for it, and we had vocabulary lists per chapter. Then I moved to this other excellent book called Intermediate Reader in Modern Chinese, which is just excellent. And there we're dealing with authentic texts. That was after 3 or 4 months. Authentic texts by Zhou Enlai, by Mao Zedong, by Hu Shi, and ample vocabulary lists, plus explanations, not explanations, but pointing out the structures. I'm not going to grab, but 就算你怎么怎么，你还是怎么怎么 or由于什么 whatever. Of course, in their explanations, they were full of I looked at it, VPS1 diagrams. This is a predicate. I never looked at any of that stuff. I just wanted to get a sense of the structure. This is the structure. This is how they say it. And so that has always been my approach. But what has changed now is, and I'll quickly, not flash backwards, but fast forward to today, from let's say 1970 or 1968, 69, when I was studying Chinese. In those days, I had these big open reel tape recorders, all right? And I looked for books that had vocabulary lists with each chapter, because looking things up in a dictionary was so time-consuming and hopeless. Today, for example, I happen to be watching television, and there's a Danish movie called A Royal Affair, which is about the Struense period when there was a mad king, King Christian in Denmark, and it's a lovely movie. And I was trying desperately to try and understand the Danish, but it was just too difficult. It's sufficiently different from Swedish, and it was just hard to understand in the movie, but it's a great movie. And I happen to have bought that's a Swedish novel, and I happen to have bought that novel in the 80s or early 90s when I was working on my Swedish, and I hadn't yet read it. I buy so many books that I don't read sometimes. So I went up and had a look at it. And then I said, wow, that must exist in ebook form. So I then scoured the internet and was able to buy an ebook. The ebook comes in the EPUB format, which I then put into Calibre, this program that I have that converts it into a text format. The text format then is a format that I can import into Link, because my vocabulary in Swedish, because I was there doing business and stuff, for a lot of stuff, reading literature and so forth, there's a lot of missing words. So I would rather read this book in Swedish on Link, where I can look up the words. And I have no trouble remembering them, because my Swedish is actually not that bad, even though I'm missing some words. So then I say, hey, there must be an audiobook for this. So I searched for the audiobook. It turns out that Audioteka, which I have already used for Polish and for Czech, and which has an app that you install on your iPhone, well, they have a Swedish version of Audioteka, and lo and behold, they have this book, which is called Livläkarens besök in Swedish. So I download the audio. I now have it on my iPhone. It's not on my iPhone. I think it's being streamed, but I can access it via my iPhone. So I can now access my Russian history by Akunin in Russian from my iPhone. I can access Polish and Czech resources, Swedish resources from my iPhone. Meanwhile, the texts I upload into Link and I can read them. I don't have to look for vocabulary, readers with vocabulary notes or whatever. So my ability to study at any time, wherever I am, to connect with Polish, Swedish, to read material where I can quickly look up words that I don't know and then I see them highlighted in yellow. I mean, all of that has changed dramatically, but the basic principle that it's going to be, like Stephen Krashen says, it's going to be meaningful content that will enable you to learn the language. You might trigger that meaningful content by having a conversation with someone. Meaningful content for you might be music, might be German rock music. That's not what interests me. But it has to be meaningful content. And if you are getting messages, words, content that's meaningful. Meaningful means you're interested and you're able to understand it. It might be that you have to look up words in order to understand it. But again, just listening to something that's noise is not meaningful. It has to be meaningful, interesting, and yet you're kind of able to understand it or can get where you understand it. That's what's going to make you learn the language. Once you accept that, then, for example, I'm doing some Polish history, and it's interesting. I'm enjoying reading about Polish history. I'm looking up words. I'm not concerned about my progress. I mean, yeah, at Link we record how many words I know and stuff. All that tells me is I'm busy. I'm doing something with the language. I'm reading, I'm listening. I know that I will gradually acquire the language by doing this. I am not at all under any pressure. I just understand what I understand. Some parts may be a little fuzzy, but I can look things up, and I'm enjoying it. I'm learning. So I guess the only difference between now and when I studied, let's say, Chinese, is that when I was doing Chinese, I was under pressure because I was being paid by the government to learn Chinese. That was my job. Other than that, now I'm under no pressure. I guess when I lived in Japan, I was under some pressure to get my Japanese level up so that I could use it for business. Now when I'm doing Russian or Ukrainian or Polish, I'm under no pressure whatsoever. I'm enjoying it. But the basic principle that it's massive, and I should point out, by the way, that that's more or less what I said in my book. This happens to be the Chinese version of my book called The Linguist, A Language Learning Odyssey. It was published in China and Taiwan, by the way. And this was written about 10 years ago. Nothing that I said in here has changed. Just the technology has changed. The ability to do these things has become so much better. 10 years ago to today, it hasn't changed. And from 50 years ago to today, it hasn't changed. Those are still the basic principles. And so, in answer, I hope that answers the question that someone asked on my website, or at least on YouTube here. Thank you for listening, and let me know if you would like me to speak in some other language. Bye for now.